I never thought my family would stoop this low, but I guess money changes people, even blood relatives. For context, I, 34F, am what you'd call the successful one in the family. I built a tech company from scratch that got acquired last year for a pretty substantial sum. Not, buy an island, money, but definitely never worry about bills again money. I've always been careful about it though, living modestly and investing wisely. My father, 68M, has had heart problems for years. Triple bypass at 60, stents at 65. So when my stepmom Diane, 54F, called me sobbing that dad had collapsed and was being rushed to Memorial Hospital, I dropped everything. I was in the middle of a meeting 3 hours away, but I told my team I had a family emergency and hit the road immediately. The entire drive, my stomach was in knots. Dad and I had our differences, especially after he remarried just a year after mom died, but he's still my father. Diane kept texting updates that sounded increasingly dire. Doctors are concerned. They're taking him to surgery. Please hurry. I must have broken every speed limit getting there. When I arrived at my childhood home, not the hospital, which should have been my first clue, Diane's car was in the driveway along with my stepbrother Kyle's, 29M, and stepsister Tiffany's, 27F, vehicles. I rushed to the door, not even bothering to knock. Where's Dad? Why aren't you at the hospital? I demanded as I burst into the living room. The scene that greeted me was bizarre. Dad was sitting in his recliner, looking perfectly healthy if a bit uncomfortable. Diane, Kyle, and Tiffany were arranged on the sofa like they were posing for a family portrait. On the coffee table sat a stack of official-looking papers. Surprise, Kyle said flatly. What's going on? I asked, my panic quickly transforming into confusion. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. Sweetheart, we need to talk about some financial matters. Diane took over. Her earlier tears mysteriously vanished. Your father's medical bills have been piling up, and with the new treatments he needs. She gestured to the papers. We've drawn up some documents that would help secure his future care. I picked up the top sheet. It was a transfer of assets form. They wanted me to sign over nearly half of my money to a family trust that, conveniently, Diane would manage as the trustee. You faked a heart attack to get me to sign this. I asked incredulously. Not faked, Dad mumbled. Exaggerated the urgency, perhaps. I sat down, trying to process the betrayal. The rational part of my brain told me to walk out immediately, but something made me curious about how far they'd go. So I decided to play along. I see, I said, keeping my voice neutral. And how much exactly are we talking about? Just $3 million, Diane said, as if she were asking to borrow $20. For medical expenses and to help Kyle and Tiffany get on their feet. I nodded slowly, picked up the pen, and pretended to read through the documents carefully. As I flipped through the papers, I noticed they'd gone all out. There were medical bills, real ones, but from 6 months ago that I'd already paid, mixed in with the transfer documents as if to justify their scheme. The family trust was structured so that while technically for Dad's care, Diane had complete discretionary control. I could see clauses allowing for family support and education expenses for Kyle and Tiffany. These medical bills, I said, holding up the statements. I thought insurance covered most of this. Deductibles, Diane said quickly, and the experimental treatments aren't covered. I nodded as if that made perfect sense, even though Dad's insurance plan, which I helped him select, had a maximum out-of-pocket of $4,000 per year. Not exactly the millions they were asking for. And what treatments are we talking about exactly? I asked, my pen hovering over the signature line. Dad shifted uncomfortably. There's a specialist in Switzerland. Dr. Hoffman, Diane interjected smoothly. He's pioneering cellular regeneration for cardiac tissue. I almost laughed. They'd clearly Googled expensive heart treatments, but hadn't bothered to check if they were actually legitimate. No such treatment existed, at least not outside of very early research phases. I see, I said. And Kyle and Tiffany need money for business ventures. Kyle said eagerly. I've got this amazing cryptocurrency opportunity. And I want to open a boutique, Tiffany added. Designer clothes, very exclusive. I nodded seriously, as if these weren't the same schemes they'd been floating for years while living off Dad and Diane. Kyle had never held a job longer than 3 months, and Tiffany's fashion career consisted of an Instagram account with bot followers. Well, family is family, I said with a sigh. Let me just make a quick call to my financial advisor to move some funds around. Their faces lit up, but I noticed Dad still wouldn't look at me. I stepped into the kitchen, ostensibly to make my call. Instead, I texted my actual financial advisor to lock down all my accounts immediately, and then called my friend Sarah, who happens to be a detective. Need a favor, I whispered. Can you run background checks on Diane, Kyle, and Tiffany Smith? Something's not right. When I returned to the living room, I brought glasses of water for everyone, acting the part of the dutiful daughter about to be swindled. So, I said casually as I picked up the pen again. How long have you been planning this? Planning what? Diane asked, her smile faltering slightly. This intervention for Dad's health. I clarified, watching their faces relax. We've been worried for months, Tiffany said, placing her hand dramatically on her chest. Daddy's health is everything to us. Dad nodded weakly, still avoiding eye contact. I started signing the papers, making sure my signatures were illegible scribbles, nothing like my actual signature. As I did, I noticed something odd. Diane kept checking her phone, and Kyle seemed increasingly anxious, constantly looking at the front door. Are we expecting someone else? I asked innocently. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Records show Diane filed for bankruptcy last month. Kyle has gambling debts of $50,000 plus. Tiffany has 3 Max credit cards. Also, your dad refinanced his house 2 weeks ago, pulled out all equity. Everything clicked. This wasn't just about greed, they were desperate. And the nervous glances toward the door suddenly made sense. They weren't just after my money. There was something else happening. I signed the last page with a theatrical flourish. There we go. All done. Wonderful, Diane said, snatching the papers before the ink was dry. I'll just make copies, and then we can all celebrate as a family. As she hurried to the home office with the documents, I turned to my father. Dad? I said quietly so the others couldn't hear. What aren't you telling me? Dad's eyes finally met mine, filled with what looked like genuine shame. Before he could answer, the front door opened. A well-dressed man in his 50s carrying a leather briefcase walked in without knocking, followed by another man who looked like private security. Perfect timing, Richard, Diane called out, returning with the papers. We're all set here. The man, Richard, apparently, gave me a calculating look before turning to Diane. So this is the daughter with the deep pockets? Everything's signed. Yes, Diane lied smoothly. Just need to get them notarized. Richard set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it, revealing notary stamps and more paperwork. Excellent. Once these transfers are complete, we can proceed with the development deal. I raised an eyebrow. Development deal? Kyle shot Richard a warning look that came too late. The man clearly thought I was fully on board. Yes, the resort development, Richard continued enthusiastically. Once we acquire the adjacent properties, including your father's land, we can break ground on the casino resort by fall. The investors are very excited about. Richard, Diane interrupted sharply. Perhaps we should discuss the business aspects later? But the damage was done. I turned to Dad, whose face had gone pale. You're selling the house? I asked. This was the house where I grew up, where Mom had lived until she died. The house Dad had promised would stay in the family. The market's hot right now, Dad mumbled, not meeting my eyes again. I looked around at the family photos on the walls, at Mom's antique reading lamp in the corner, at the height marks scratched into the kitchen doorframe, tracking my growth from toddler to teenager. And my money was for? The investors needed additional capital, Richard explained, oblivious to the tension. With your contribution, everyone gets a larger share of the profits. A true family enterprise. I stood up slowly. So let me make sure I understand. There was no heart attack, no urgent medical bills, no Swiss specialist. You orchestrated this entire emergency to trick me into financing a casino development deal that involves selling our family home. Diane stepped forward, dropping the concerned act completely. Don't be so dramatic. It's just a house, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The returns will be enormous. If the returns are so great, I said coldly, why do you need my money? Richard cleared his throat. Well, to be honest, the initial investors pulled out last week. Something about Kyle's gambling history making them nervous. He glanced at Kyle, who suddenly found the carpet fascinating. But with your tech industry credentials and capital, we can salvage the deal. That's when I pulled out my phone and hit play on the recording I'd started when I stepped into the kitchen earlier. My voice, followed by Diane's, filled the room. So, how long have you been planning this? Planning what? This intervention for Dad's health. I stopped the recording. I never actually signed those documents. Those signatures are meaningless scribbles. And now I have evidence of attempted fraud. The silence was deafening. Richard looked confused, then alarmed. He began gathering his papers hastily. This is a family misunderstanding, he muttered. I was not aware. Save it, I said. My attorney will be contacting you. Dad finally found his voice. Sweetheart, please. Dad? I cut him off. You were going to sell Mom's house for a casino? His face crumpled. Diane said it was the only way to cover Kyle's debts without losing everything. I turned to face my stepfamily. You should all be ashamed. Using Dad's actual heart condition to fake an emergency? Manipulating him to sell his home? Trying to steal my money? The looks on their faces were priceless. Shock, embarrassment, and the dawning realization that their scheme had not only failed but had been recorded as evidence. I'm taking Dad with me, I announced, helping him to his feet. We'll be staying at my place while he consults with an actual cardiac specialist and a divorce attorney. As we walked toward the door, I couldn't resist one parting shot. Oh, and Diane, those medical bills you showed me? I paid them months ago. You might want to check your mail more carefully. The stunned silence followed us all the way to my car. Dad squeezed my hand as we drove away from the house, his house, that they'd almost tricked him into selling. I'm sorry, he whispered. I was a fool. We'll fix this, Dad, I promised. Family looks out for each other. Real family, anyway.